My name is Lesroy Williams, and today I am here with Dr. Sharon and Gopaul Nicol, who is my guest, and we will be having an interview today on the crime situation in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Dr. Sharon and Gopaul Nicol is a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist. For the past 25 years, Dr. Nicol has been an international psychological consultant throughout the region, the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and Canada, and in particular here in St. Kitts and Nevis. As a psychology professor, she authored 14 books on topics including assessment and culture, working with West Indian families, the bottom-up and multi-systems model of governing. Since returning to Trinidad and Tobago 19 years ago, Dr. Nicol has served as a member of parliament, senator, and an advisor to several government ministers. She has dedicated her professional life towards the goal of eradicating social diseases like crime, poverty, discrimination, and corruption. Dr. Nicol, welcome.
Thank you.
It's very good to have you.
Thank you very much.
Right.
I'm happy to be here.
Now, you said that you were a forensic psychologist. Clarify that for me.
Well, there are different forms of psychology. Most of us are familiar with clinical psychology, which is where you provide in therapy as a form of intervention, psychological therapy, that is. And then there's school and sports and so on. But forensic is a relatively new one when you compare to the others. It's a psychologist that functions primarily in the legal system and with the courts. And that psychologist will help a judge determine who should get custody. Is a person mentally capable of being charged with murder, things like that. And I had really studied clinical psychology at first, but I was so in love with the discipline of psychology, I just couldn't stop. And then when I was subpoenaed in court a lot for Caribbean families, I saw the need to study forensic psychology.
Right. Now, the Caribbean as a region has been plagued with crime.
Yes.
Unfortunately so, but we know what has contributed to that. And you have referred to crime as a social disease. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a disease that is driven by primarily unequal social conditions. So it's not like a medical disease, respiratory kind of this virus like COVID, or a disease like AIDS where you get through sexual contact. You become afflicted with crime primarily because of situations in which you find yourself. So it's not something genetic. It cannot be passed on like how AIDS could be. But you might be in a home where all adults are involved in criminal activity, and you have been socialized through that experience and decide, because it's always a choice you make at the end of the day, that you follow what your parents did or whoever in the home. And so it becomes diseased, and we have to treat it, and that is why social scientists are the best persons to treat crime.
Mm-hmm. So socialization plays a big part. People are trained and so on in the family.
Yes.
And in the schools and in the churches and the social institutions that help to nurture people.
Yes, into criminal activity.
Right.
And that is why it is so difficult for us in the region to understand it, largely because in the first place we don't value and respect professions like psychologists. Of course, we have grown immensely. But psychologists are usually the last to be hired, the first to be fired, primarily because we don't think of social diseases. We think, clearly, you did this is your fault, and that's the end of it. Go to jail, whatever is the thing. But we don't understand what may be what is the etiology, the cause behind it. Mm-hmm. And some of us who understood that dedicated our lives, as I did, towards understanding it, coming up with the best models for it. And that's it. Took me 15 years, but I did. Yeah.
Okay, now you have given up your service as a consultant to the Ministry of National Security here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the efforts of the Ministry of National Security to mitigate the effects of crime,
Yeah.
crime prevention. Tell us about your work and, you know, how you have been involved in this area in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Well, in 2019, I have always been involved throughout the region, addressing any social problem that popped up since I graduated 35 years ago. But in the last 2-3 years, we experienced here in St. Kitts a crisis when we had, it was 8 or 9 murders in 1 week. And the Prime Minister and Minister and P.S. Petty, they're aware of my work in the region with crime and so on. And so they called me right away, and within a week I was up here. But they had already have mapped out an outgang model. And when I looked at the model, I realized it had aligned very much with my multi-systems model. And so it was really a match and fit immediately for us to hit the ground and address the crisis. And the crisis intervention part was to literally inactivate the gangs. That's the first thing you have to do in a crisis, is stop the behavior. But to do that, you had to have alternatives, like how will the gang members survive? So you had to look quickly at jobs for them. And around the country, there were a multitude of jobs, so it wasn't like we were lacking in creating employment, but it meant that we had to place them according to where they will best fit. Supervisors, they had to check off if they were attending every day, and then at the end of the week or however, once every 2 weeks a month, I'm not sure how the payment went, they get paid. And so that took care of that. But to deal with such a crisis, you have to also remember they came from crime-riddled environments, whether it was a home or community. So you have to know, you can't put some of them back in the same home if the home was riddled with crime.
So it means then that you would have to have a change of environment.
That's correct. Alternative
the environment
housing.
that contributed in the first place
That's
to the
right.
social disease.
That's right, you understand. And you see, what was challenging about that is that some of them could have gone back in the home because they in the home was the problem point person. Whereas other homes, it was a family unit. So the interventions didn't just stop with the persons who were involved in gang-related, or should I say now the former gang members. We had to deal with the families. You had to provide psychological counseling. You had to look at every avenue that they will adjust so there would be no recidivism to go back into criminal life. And that required money to do that. It required the big businesses to begin investing and assisting. Part of my systems model, you have to pull all the units that are relevant in, and that included businesses who will invest so that not all the financial burden will fall on the government, and they will have to assist in helping to construct the lives of the gang members.
And to re-socialize.
Re-socialize, re-educate, and that's phase one. And that really normally takes about 18 months, but we lost 2020, unfortunately. And so we can't even consider that in counting. So we have not entered phase two here, as I had done in Trinidad in one constituency, only one constituency. I saw the absolute success of the model. And that constituencies in Trinidad is like 30-some thousand persons per constituency. So when I'm talking one constituency, it's almost half of the country here. And I was able to literally wipe out 27 gangs literally in 18 months because we didn't have a year that we lost. So we saw phase one and phase two roll right in, where they later became employed on their own, independent of government. Isn't that a dream or what? I mean, independent of government. And today, this is now 14 years later in my case, these former gang members in that constituency, 60% of them own their own small businesses. That was part of it. What do you want to do? You want to be trained as a plumber, as an electrician, or own small businesses? And we grouped them together. And 30% of them work in the private sector and 10% in the public sector.
So do you think that there is a nexus between a lack of opportunities and crime? Do you think there's a nexus, a connection between poverty and crime? Because poverty too is a social disease.
That's correct. Yes, in that, first of all, unfortunately, our cultures in the region, we define success along a British elitist education kind of system. And so persons who don't get CXC and are not allowed to go on to university, they basically are left to languish in society unless they can find employment, alternative employment. Some of them do, and they do fine. But in one of my books, I spoke about intellectual equity. The genius of the artist and the sportsman and the musician should be no less valued than the genius of you as a journalist and PhDs like myself and so on. But it is, unfortunately. And this is why I'm so impressed with this ministry that falls under Keela Byron Nisbet, which includes entertainment and talent. I'm hoping that out of that ministry, they will harness talents within the society and create industries which will further create employment, but meaningful employment for those youngsters. And because haven't you ever noticed many of those persons who were in criminal life, if they ask them to draw you sitting there, they can paint you just the way you are. They're geniuses, but we never really harness and nurtured and tap those resources. And they are left to just languish, and they end up looking at all way of making money quick.
Because of neglect.
And
nobody really valued
their talent.
The gifts and talents that they have.
And it's intellectual inequity. Remember when I said crime and social diseases are driven by social inequity conditions? This is an example. In this case, this is educational inequity, because we value, and I'm not negating the importance of the academic achievement. I'm certainly a beneficiary of that very system. But I'm saying that we have to bring equity, and we have to bring respect, and we have to create industries that will match the geniuses of these youngsters, so they would not have to leap out of their passion and go into a world of crime. And remember, crime world welcomes everyone. If you're pushed out of the education system or from your family, they'll say, come on in.
You know, there are very educated people who are involved in crime.
Of course.
White-collar crime. They're stealing millions of dollars.
Glad you brought that up.
They're using their education for nefarious activities. So it is not only the person who has not received an education and who might be in some way disadvantaged because of that,
That's right.
or shoved aside, and people not really looking at their gifts and talents in other areas. But some people who are very academic, PhDs,
Doctors,
suit and ties,
lawyers.
and doctors and so on, they are involved in crime.
Well, I'm so glad you raised that issue, because there are generally 4 layers that you see in crime. Of course, we are talking here about the criminal and gang-related. There's the domestic violence situation. There's the community situation where a guy could get upset that some other guy took his girlfriend or took his car or money or something, and you see that. But then there's a 4th, and you just nailed it, white-collar crime. I always see that linked somehow to political crime, if you want to put white-collar crime under there, because it's at an executive level, oftentimes found among people who are wealthy, educated, and so on. Corruption. That's a social disease. That's listed as one of the many social diseases as well. The sad part about that level of crime is that those people, very rarely do we see consequences. And this is why when you see someone who got involved in corruption, especially if it happened somewhere between age 25 and 45, you can safely say that person is seasoned. They may have escaped it. They may have stood no consequences. Behavior has already been formed. It has become part of their personality. In psychology, we have clinical disorders that are treatable, and then there are personality disorders like antisocial personality, psychopaths, and so on, which is where a lot of those corrupt persons engaged in economic corruption, white-collar crime, they fall. They are treating them, expecting them to change is almost non-existent after age 25, especially when I say up to 45, meaning that they have been seasoned in it. So when you see people get involved in top positions, whether it's executive or top governmental positions, and they engage in that activity, the chances of you should not want to put them at the final decision-making position, meaning the leader. The leader, whether if it's of the political unit or the leader of a country or the leader of an executive position in a big company, because they will more than likely repeat that behavior, especially if there were no consequences in the first or second instance. And if they will more than likely repeat that behavior, corruption will breed in that organization even more if they are at the top.
I'm happy because we have a saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But I often say that I don't see it that way. Power does not corrupt anybody. It is people who are already corrupt.
There you go.
And so
That's
therefore the power exacerbates it and brings it out.
Gave them the authority
Yes.
to bring out what was already there.
What was already there.
That's right. I'm so glad you raised that and gave that an analogy or maxim of power corrupts and absolutely. I tell you, we sit and try to be naive, and one of my roles as a social scientist, fortunately one that is independent economically, which allows me, I suppose, I don't know if it's that because I was always like that long before I even went off to university to study. You just have to tell the truth with what you see. And now as a scientist, I'm going to always say what I understand to be problematic. Dr. Laws, the phenomenal work of Dr. Laws allowed us to understand if you don't follow the COVID regulations, this is what can happen. It's the same for us as social scientists. And so, yes, I speak out, but when I do, there are people who say, oh, you're saying that I could never change. I was caught with economic corruption. I siphoned money out of my agency or from my clients or from the government. And that was a mistake I made. I was just 40 years old. I'm recalling someone who's told me this recently in my country. And why? I said, was it the first time that you had done that? No, it wasn't. That's why you did it the second time. There were no consequences for you. You didn't go to jail. You didn't stand the consequences as the criminal gangsters tend to. Those who are caught, you didn't. So you are going to repeat it again and again. If the opportunity, just as you said, being put in a position of power, of leadership, where nobody can tell you what to do, you're going to do it again. It's part of your DNA, personality DNA. And so when I say personality disorders are hard to treat, it's because it now is part of who you are, as opposed to a clinical disorder like depression. You can treat depression more easily than you can treat a personality disorder. And this is why corruption must not be tolerated in government.
Yes.
It must not. And that's, by the way, one of the most crippling of social diseases in the region for us is that corruption from the governmental level, and from the big boys and girls level. Because when you see we have when corruption happens, economic, we lose millions of dollars that could have been gone towards changing the lives of people who are poor.
It undermines development.
That's right.
Dr. Nicol. But at the very same time, a lot of it is done with impunity.
Yes.
And so therefore, that is why it continues. People are not really held to account.
Yes.
And pay.
And pay.
For their corrupt behavior.
Yeah.
How many politicians, are in prison? How many politicians, they've dragged to the courts and so on? It goes down the drain.
It goes down the drain. Even if they come before the courts. And they know it. This is why They laugh at us when we talk about. I say all the time when this one say I'm going to sue you, he says sue me. It's like, so what? No, but nothing is going to happen to them, and they're going to do it again and again. And it's only, I tell you, when that when that stops, and when they're arrested and one time one of our former prime ministers was put in jail. He stayed a week. Was for all kind of corruption. But the current prime minister say he got sick in jail. He got ill, as if others who get ill could get out. He got out in a week. They brought him home. So you just have to, this is why I am adamant about the choices that we make when we choosing people to be leaders of organizations, of schools, and everything. They have to be held accountable.
Yes, and that in the context of what we are speaking in terms of crime, leaders and so on have to show example.
Yes, that's right.
For others to follow.
Yeah.
Because if they are not, they are
Others
setting
will.
the tone and they are creating the climate for others to
do the same.
to do the very same thing.
And the others will say, well, you did it, so why are you telling me not to do it? I'll think of an educational corrupted practices akin to what we are talking about here. When a principal many years ago got a child pregnant, my father was the Caribbean Union for leaders, for teachers in the Caribbean, and at the time in Trinidad as well. And he went to the Prime Minister and he said, fire him. This child is 16 years old, fire him. And you know what the Prime Minister said? And he was an excellent Prime Minister, by the way. He said, but he has only 18 months left to get his pension. He said, the man is going to lose his pension. And my father said, but the child has lost her life because she's kicked out of school. In those days, you couldn't stay in school when you were pregnant. There was no school for you. They since had schools. So on. And my father said, more importantly, we have to make him a poster boy, man, for when you engage in bad behavior against our children in the school system. An example. And it wasn't. And of course, many years later, when a report came out in 2019, 3,777 children were pregnant. They sit and they ask, how did it happen? How did it happen? It happened because you allow it to happen at the educational level where children are housed and where they are easily victims to teachers and principals because they trust those persons whose lives their parents put in their hands. And of course, this was the beginning of it happening. If we had dealt with it, if there was an example, if there was accountability, that would never have continued.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not just at the economic level. You see it at the educational levels. You see it where, even in the churches, sadly, sometimes you see that.
The sins of the fathers.
Yeah. Religion, by the way, is one of the systems that we use with the gang because in our culture, religion plays a very important part. And we can't separate. When I told my colleagues that in America, they want to throw me out of the profession. I said, we can't separate psychology from religion in the region because people rather go to a religious counselor, a pastoral counselor, and come to us anyway.
True.
Yeah, and so that's how my whole model changed the way psychology is practiced in the region. Many of us fought to make sure the training of psychologists, American psychologists, understood a systems kind of concept.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
had to change it.
And you mentioned a very good point because we are now in an age of cynicism.
Yeah.
You speak about the science and following the science, and we hear the doctors saying in terms of following the science with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
You speak about following the science with respect to crime and so on, and your findings and doing research and all of that. However, we are seeing something today where people are very cynical. They are not trusting.
Yeah.
They are skeptics, even with the vaccine.
Even with the vaccine, yeah.
And so on. And I'm beginning to think, in terms of this social disease that we call crime. What we are seeing is another social disease, that of cynicism
Yes.
and skepticism and so on, is also, in my estimation, a social disease.
Yeah, of course it is. But it's born out of, again, mistrust of whoever the persons that we expecting them to trust. A clear example is in America. African Americans are the last to consider taking the vaccine because historically they were used as guinea pigs in the health system. A big study, Tuskegee study, where they were not given the intervention, the medical intervention, and were given sugar pills and said placebos, and they ended up getting syphilis and so on. And so they don't trust the system. And so you're seeing it with COVID. They're very cynical. They're not trusting. Same for crime. There are people who feel that we are saying, okay, let us, because crime, you have a preventative aspect of it. And so the government here included a whole new group called Explorers.
Yes.
You heard of Explorers,
yes,
right?
the Explorers Youth Group.
And, well, they have a more advanced age up to age 12. They go up to age 18 now. But the Explorers is a preventable strategy. That institution, now known as Explorers, is to prevent crime. But crime is two-pronged. You have to prevent, you have to have strategies to prevent, such as the Explorers, where children are channeled into healthy activities, where easily you can pick up a child who is going on the wrong path because they're involved in groups where there are counselors and parents involved as well. So that's prevention. And then there's a treatment, the cure, which is what I had made reference to before. But the thing is, some parents don't trust even the Explorers. They feel, well, what if my child, follow bad company? Anything because of the cynical nature around trust in crime. And of course, we have to show them that this is not the case. And today starts a week or 10 days of a camp with the Explorers, and the parents are involved, and hopefully when that's over, they will be so elated to see the healthy aspect of a program like Explorers. Most of them are on board. Just about all of them are on board, but there are some who don't feel they want their children to be involved.
Right. I'm happy that you mentioned that because we've been hearing this all-of-society approach.
Yeah.
We are hearing it now more than ever. Especially with the pandemic.
Yeah.
But it didn't have to take a pandemic for us to realize that all of society coming together to solve problems, to root out crime, to eradicate corruption, and so on. It requires all of us.
Yeah.
And you are proposing with crime a multi-pronged, a multi-system model. What is it?
Just what you just said. It's all of society. And why that is important, if you remember when we were young, all of society was involved. The neighbors could have corrected us. The churches all the units were there. It took a village to raise a child. And so it is not unusual, this model is not unusual. How it became popular is that in psychology, when we were trained to address social or psychological problems, it was either a cognitive approach, which was sit down, let the person talk through their problems, and if you change the way they think, you will change the way they behave. Or a behavioral approach. If you change their behavior, if let's say a child is afraid to go to school, you take the child to school, the child see the school is not bad, you change the behavior, you change the thinking.
Well, the experience.
Right. Well, that is when I challenged our training as psychologists. It was fairly narrow. It has way expanded since back when I had first started university. And so I realized you needed more than just that. You needed many modes of intervention, but more so you needed all the systems that support family, children, lives, period. And that is when I looked at the work of a woman by the name of Dr. Boyd Franklin, who was saying that African Americans cannot function with that psychological intervention because they don't trust psychologists, they don't trust authorities. If you go to a psychologist in America, African Americans feel they will be misdiagnosed and thrown in jail. It's that kind of thing. So she came up with a systems model which included education, and I saw the value of that. And I linked it with our previous training, the cognitive, the behavioral, multimodal, and so on. And out of it came the multi-systems to do for psychological intervention. But then I later saw the relevance of it in dealing with social diseases now like crime and corruption.
Yes.
So it's holistic, and it means everybody is watching what's happening with your child, with your family. You have support systems that you use, but we did that when we were young. We just had no sophisticated name to call it, but we did have
It's like an ecosystem, no?
yes.
And sometimes what we're doing is that we're treating the part rather than treating the whole.
That's right. So you take a child that has a problem and you say, that is the problem. When in fact, there are issues that are going on in the home. The child could be sexually molested in the home. But you're not focusing on that because it's the child who, the child goes to school, not performing. So the child is the problem there. It's the same way. The gangs, we had to involve the family. We had to look at what was constituting all of this kind of behavior that leading people to be in gangs. It's a holistic picture. And therefore, if whatever causes it must be the solution that you have to look at. The very institutions that cause it, you have to look at those institutions to solve it.
Right. Right. Now, you have been dealing with a number of groups,
Yeah.
several groups in the Federation. Do you care to tell us what have been some of your findings?
Well, again, in keeping with the systems approach and in keeping with recognizing that it takes a whole community to raise a family, a healthy family, I had to meet with all of the systems of my model. So I had to meet with the education systems like teachers and principals in there. I was very impressed when I saw how involved they are in understanding their role in addressing and preventing crime. It was quite more advanced than I had anticipated, considering we had lost 2020. It was impressive. So the educational arm, they're on board. And they're so on board that even the community police who are in the schools now, so when children are truant, the community police, they go and they get the children and they sit and talk to them and they find out why you don't want to go to school. And if the problem is at school, fine, they bring the school in. If the problems are at home, they bring the families in. That's what community police is doing. That's part of the systems model. And I must say, I want to take a moment to say that this country is ahead than any country when it comes to the respecting of community policing and the actualization of what it was really meant when it was formed. We have in Trinidad, for instance, we say community policing, but we are not practicing community policing. Police go into communities and arrest these guys. They should be integrated in the community in their day-to-day existence before they commit crime. So they could, if you are truly into community policing, you could anticipate certain things. Not always you'll get it all. You may miss some. But if you are there, you would be able to know which homes are at risk, who are the children that are at risk. This country is doing a phenomenal job at community policing, as the educators are. That, you asked me what I discovered?
Yes.
Man, I couldn't believe it. And Inspector Isles, I don't know if you know her.
I do.
Phenomenal. She's behind the Explorers
Yes.
too. I think this woman needs to be elevated to whatever, because it's just amazing what she has done with the Explorers group. You must visit it and see the institution, how it's set up. It caters for all kinds of activity to be taking place for the youngsters to really enjoy a life of safety. And so I'm seeing the effect of community policing. I'm seeing the effect of Explorers, a preventative model. I saw the power of the educational institution with the way the principals and they are on board. And then I met with the social development unit, and it's just amazing. There's a unit called Family Matters, and this lady is just doing such a great job. So I'm saying to St. Kitts and Nevis, you have the systems in place. You have the commitment of the people who are running these programs. We got to stay on track and stay focused, even when we fall off, when there's an unfortunate incident that happens, whether if it's a murder that took place or family violence. Continue the preventative work. It's solidly, it's working, and it's of a lofty standard, because I compare everything with when I worked in England, Canada, the US, and throughout the region, because I work wherever Caribbean families are. My specialty is Caribbean.
Yes.
Yeah, I had no interest in the other cultures but Caribbean. all my clinics for Caribbean families. So I'm seeing it from an international point, Mr. Williams, and they are on top of it. And the government, by Akila's ministry, that entertainment and talent, you may think that is nothing. But let me tell you, if they do that right, we will be getting youngsters who are talented in areas, making industries, so it's lessening crime with the explorers, with the interventions, with the school, with the religious, because Bishop and they're all involved. This is part of the team.
Yes.
And the youngsters coming out of crime, they go there to counseling before they even come to us.
Yeah.
Come to-
Right. Now, you know that you spoke about community policing.
yeah.
But do you know that in some countries, and some Caribbean countries, the police is seen to be corrupt?
Of course, yeah.
They're seen to be more part of the problem
Yeah,
than they are more of the solution.
that's right. That's true.
And that is important, how the police is viewed,
Yes.
how our court system, our judicial system is viewed. Are the courts fair? Are they independent? Is justice is justice seen? Are cases tried quickly? All of those things, I think, can contribute
Yeah.
towards the whole atmosphere and so on when it comes to crime.
Well, you are right. I'm so glad you brought that up because there's no doubt throughout the region, I'm focusing more on us at this point.
Yes.
The police are seen, one, as part of, they get paid off to turn a blind eye to corruption. The cases they take forever to be called, and when they are called, police don't show up. So again, it's postponed. We have a history of that. And this is why it is so important. When Commissioner Brandy became part of our team, he understood, we were very clear, that we have to be watching all of those very issues within the police service that could be hindrances in us really eradicating crime. I could only say what I am seeing, some evidence of taking seriously what we talked about. I know that there are things that will be going on that I wouldn't be aware of behind the scenes, but if the community policing is representative of the other aspects, which means just as the community police stopping the youngsters from getting involved in crime and from missing school and all of that, if that is indicative of how the community, the Commissioner of Police and his team, the ACPs Brown and Adams and so on, if it is those guys, and they are part, by the way, of the team as well, if the community policing is indicative of what is happening at that level in terms of stopping crime, then I'm hopeful. But we will only know as people get exposed to their involvement, because they have been involved in economic corruption big time. They have been paid off to say nothing. They have been involved in allowing guns to come into countries by making the borders porous at certain times in the night that ships could come in with guns. This is a reality with police. And so we have to say, let's hope our national security here in St. Kitts and Nevis, I want to be specific to here right now, is honorable. The Prime Minister is the Minister of National Security. P.S. Petty, he's on top of things, he's watching things very closely. Let's hope they're honorable enough. I believe they are. And I feel confident in saying that because I've worked so closely with P.S. Petty and to a lesser extent the Prime Minister in terms of the crime part, he is part of it, but not on the day-to-day as I go around and so on, as I do with P.S. Petty. I feel we will knock that out as well. We have literally stopped gang murders, you know. I heard of an incident that happened yesterday, but we are still waiting for the police report to see if in fact that is a gang related, although there's no evidence to suggest anything yet. But it's the first, if it is, since 2019 we haven't had gang related criminal murders. We've had some sporadic.
We've had some sporadic murders. For example, 2 young men were murdered at one time, well, they were shot at one time, both of them died
Yeah.
in McKnight. That was perhaps a few weeks ago, and others. But
Were they?
peace sometimes, Dr. McNichol, can be fragile.
Yeah.
And it can only take one thing to
trigger.
catapult people back into certain behaviors. One of the things, of course, is that the sustainability of peace is what is important. And we have, in order for it to be sustained, there has to be not just people working and being given jobs and being given resources, material or whatever, but hearts and minds must change. A conversion must take place. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense that I am still holding on to my guns. And so therefore, when anything happens,
It could.
I still have it to go back to.
Well, that is why it was set up, the crisis intervention part was set up the way it did, to make sure that not only that they hand over guns, there'll be always those who would have kept theirs probably or got other guns from somewhere, but the idea was not just to hand over your guns, but to change your life. So every aspect of their life, we had to literally look at and bring about the change. And when I say there weren't gang-related criminal murders, I'm not sure how, again, the 2 weeks ago, I imagine 2 persons involved. If it was a gang, we're not talking about persons who might have been fighting over something. What we had put a stop to was the massive gang-related murders that were taking place based on criminal gangs that existed. Now, COVID brought us full force to face the reality of domestic violence and community-type violence, where persons, 2 young men, may be fighting over some kind of territorial issue like, this is my car, this is my job, I got this particular girlfriend, and you come now and you enter into my territory. Those kinds of things we had to face more in COVID because of the lockdown, because of the no gangs operating. We had to be able to look at other kind of domestic violence that leading to murder. You know, and what you just said, why it is so important that peace is fragile. Psychological intervention as a whole is a fragile process. Remember they say there's a thin line between sanity and insanity?
Yes.
No matter how healthy, you could take a healthy, normal child, raise them in the most functional home, and then you take them out of that home and put them in the most dysfunctional environment where they abuse and different things, and you will see pathology in that child within a week. How could that be when that child was so safe and raised with so much love before? How did that happen? That's how fragile we are. Yes, that's how fragile we are mentally. And that is why psychological intervention has to be a continuous process. And that is why dealing with social problems, you need a holistic approach. So if the child managed to slip out from the home, the school will catch the child. The religious institution will catch the youngster. And this is why it's so important that we unite in solving any problem that we have in the society. It may sound non-scientific in some people's mind. We need a whole country. That doesn't sound the most scientific. Yes, it is. That's the science behind dealing with social diseases.
Right. And how can we take the benefit out of crime? Because sometimes people see crime as being a benefit. And that is why they get involved in it. Because it's a benefit to them. And there are others who say that, you know, crime comes with development, but at the very same time, crime undermines development.
That's true. It's a real dichotomy, but it is true. And I have heard some people in my journey here in the past month, even while I was in quarantine for the 2 weeks, I remember people would call me and say, I think I might want to go and get involved in crime because these gangsters look as if they're getting jobs, even though the jobs are really menial in many respects.
I have had people, Dr. Nichols,
who said that.
Who have said to me, it appears, I have to say it appears, it appears that to be a gang member pays.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Well, I've heard it throughout my time here in the last couple of weeks, and people have said. One young woman said to me 2 days ago, "I think I might go and do something so that I could get arrested and be in a gang, and then I may be able to get a loan or something from the bank." And I said, "That is so absurd. That is like saying, listen, I'd like to get COVID because I visited the hospital the other day, and those people who stay in the hospital who have COVID and have to stay there for 2 weeks, they are getting free food." I mean, the whole thing is absurd. You are healthy, supposedly, psychologically, that you don't need services and support from the government. You have done well. You don't need that. The gangsters are not. And so they needed it. And so all the support we had to give, including if a couple of them wanted to form a small business instead of cleaning or doing whatever the government was giving, is to help them get a loan. That's part of it. You shouldn't say they shouldn't get a loan because you are having difficulty. We should speak to the banks and look at the difficulty banks put young people through in getting loans. You can't say because part of the peace initiative, part of the solving of crime was to assist them. And most of them, it's only about 20% of them that got loans to think. Most of them didn't. It's like some of them who got houses. That's another thing people say, and they got houses. Some of them got houses alternative to where they were living because of where they were living with criminal infestation going on. And so it is in that vein, but it is not better for you to go and involve yourself in becoming a gang in order to get those services. Continue doing the good work that you are doing, and you will not need that. My father captured that moment so beautifully for me as a young girl when my brother used to get D's in school, and he went from D's to C's, and it was like a big celebration in our house, and he got this big Cadbury chocolate, you know, the largest size. And I'm sitting here watching this bizarre arrangement thinking, here it is, I'm getting all A's all the time, behaving well, and I never got a chocolate for this. And he's getting this. And my father saw the look on my face, and he said to me, "We don't need to reward you to do anything. Mom and I should tell you thank you for being a child that was easy, you got through, you're basically doing everything right."
But you know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of that biblical story of the prodigal son.
Yes.
The wayward son who went out, in fact, he asked for his inheritance from the father.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't do that while somebody is still alive. It's really an insult.
Yeah.
Really. And he went with it, and he squandered it on loose living, debauchery, and licentious ways, and women, and all kinds of things. And then he realized that he was in a situation where he hit rock bottom. And then realized, look, I had all of this in my father's house.
Yeah.
And so therefore it is that point when he realized the road that he was going down, then he decided to turn his life around and to return. That is where, when people come to the realization that they're into something wrong, and turn their life around and then come. And then the son who was at home, who never was wayward, who stayed at home and worked, he said, when the prodigal son came back, the father was waiting all this time for him to return from his waywardness and whatnot. And when the father saw him, he was still a long way off, and he ran to him, and he hugged him, and he placed a coat, a mantle upon him, and kissed him, and he gave him a ring and all of that sort of a thing, and said, we will have a big celebration. The younger son, who stayed at home, was angry and said, but I never had all of this. I've slaved, and I've done all of this, and you never treated me this way. And the father said, all that I have is yours. All that I've ever had is yours. But sometimes that reminds me of what we're saying in terms of when people have changed their lives, when we've helped them to change their lives, we must be happy for them.
That's right.
And we must not feel that they are being given more than we are.
Exactly.
Because we have been law-abiding, and we have been, and so on.
That's right. That's so right. And when Dad told me that, I remember, and he said, and also you have learned at a very young age to reward yourself. You are pleased with your accomplishment. You don't need a chocolate. You don't even need Mom and I to praise you. You somehow have found self-reward. And it's when I became a psychologist, I understand what Dad was connecting. And that's exactly what we have to tell the people who say, if they get in it, I should go and be a gangster. No, you don't. You have shown that you were able to navigate your life successfully without turning to crime. Continue. We have to speak to our banks to be more generous to young people, that they can get loans, and that they can get loans for houses and cars and education primarily.
We have to help people to change and to be better.
That's
and
right.
whenever we see that as a society,
Be happy.
we should be happy.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the whole of the society benefits.
You know, one of the gangsters in Trinidad, when they changed so much and had done so well, she and her husband were able to put their daughter through medical school, which was huge accomplishment. And they got their bacon shack in all of the Massey grocery stores, because I had helped them to go through the Food and Drug and approve this frozen bacon shack kind of thing. And they have done so well. And you know, now, if we need anything in that community, in that constituency, we don't have to go and spend a penny, you know. All those 60% who in their small businesses, they jump in to help. They are mentoring the young people. And that is really what it is. And we're supposed to be happy. And even if they surpass us, be proud of that.
Yes.
You know, instead of trying to pull them back down and say, well, they got this and therefore we should get it. And don't be angry with your government and saying, well, you must give me this because you gave the gangs that. They needed it. They had been socially diseased. You are not. Use your talent and your skill to navigate your way through the system as most of us had to. Yeah.
Right. Well, Dr. McNichols, you mentioned about that shark and bake. And I must tell, I remember my days of Maracas Beach, because I studied in Trinidad.
Oh, Maracas, that's where it is.
Of that shark and bake. Right. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we leave? You know, we have come a long way in terms of the reduction of crime in our society. We want to maintain that.
Yeah.
But that all of society approach that we spoke about, the multi-pronged and multi-sectoral approach, it has to be adopted by all institutions, all organizations, families, and all of us on a whole,
That's right.
in order if this is to be sustained.
Yes.
Because that is the whole thing, is sustainability. Because we're not just talking about now. We want to create a better world for those who are going to come after us.
That's right.
The generation after us.
And that should be the goal of all of us as parents and our leaders, to want the next generation to have more, to be at peace. You know, I always believe that gross domestic happiness and gross domestic peace must be valued just as much as gross domestic product. And I really why I want to make this work, and it's already working so well here on many levels. You all who sit and live here may not see how advanced you are in terms of dealing with. Just think of how you dealt with COVID, and the result was no deaths. Well, and the management. But if you were to look at how you're dealing with crime, this holistic approach that this government has embraced, if we could make this, Mr. Williams, the blueprint for us in the region, because once we see it can work in one country, it can work anywhere. And another thing I want you to remember is that crime migrates. It's contagious. So if it's happening in Trinidad, in Antigua, it will come here. People will migrate from there to here with crime. It's very contagious. That's like many medical diseases, so is social diseases. So it's incumbent upon us to want this stopped if we want to live a happy life. We are living in Trinidad beyond burglar proof. Everything is, you know, your tree, keys, locks.
I know.
It's a horror. It's a horror. And the other day I was brought to tears as I thought about how I worry when my daughter goes out even when she's going out with her husband, tell her, Mon, call us when you get in, no matter what time, text us. Dad and I will always be concerned, because she was home with us during the COVID. She's back in the US now. And I worry less, strange enough, with her being there in Florida than home. You don't have that on a day-to-day. We got to preserve this. St. Kitts and Nevis is definitely poised to take the lead in handling social diseases, if this is an example of what we already see.
And you know,
and I have to thank you all for that.
A very small society. Just a little bit, perhaps over 50,000 people, population, St. Kitts and Nevis. And in a small society, disease, social disease, if it is present, can spread
quickly,
very quickly.
That's right.
Just like as a small country.
Yeah.
If we did not properly manage the COVID-19,
you all would have been wiped out.
What would have happened?
You would have been wiped out. And this is why the idea of opening borders was an absolute no-no. The Prime Minister was right. You cannot open the borders. We didn't either. We managed that part very well. But all of the islands that opened the borders, you saw a flurry of COVID. It's the same with social disease. This thing could be a country could be wiped out when it's small, you know. And why it could be wiped out even more so is because they don't have the human resources to deal with it when it comes in that kind of influx. And so I think you all have handled it well. I think you all have handled crime. It's nowhere near where we want it to be. We have phase 2 still to navigate now, where we're going to see the youngsters who came out of a criminal activity now seeking employment of their own, getting the skills from AVEC or wherever they helping themselves. And now, because no government should be responsible to take persons out of criminal life and then expect to take care of them for the rest of their life.
You're not babies.
No, exactly. You're adults, and it's part of your responsibility. So phase 2 is where we are now, and that's why Explorers is great, because while we are pursuing getting them their jobs, training first in AVEC, whatever their interests are, or small businesses helping them, we have the preventative arm happening at the same time. So everything is happening. And so I really want to thank this country for allowing me to see what I've always known. If you, one, really follow the science, hoping that scientists, social scientists are doing the work. That's one of the things we are weak in the region. Many social scientists, scholars in the university don't dedicate their lives this way. And it is a long ongoing process. It took me 15 years before coming home, and 10 years after I came home, I spent looking at a ground bottom-up model, which is part of the systems. So it's a lot. But if we get it right here, then we know we have the blueprint for the rest of the region. And so I want to thank all of you, the way you even reported on COVID. I told you when I walked in, I saw you, I said, oh gosh, I see him on TV all the time. Because I love watching the reports, the shows in Ziz where you are often. And I just want to thank our leaders for doing this thing right with COVID and doing it right with social diseases like crime. And let us stay focused. Let us stay focused. We're going to nail this. I want the country to understand that you are ahead right now. And even though you're a small country, you also have less resources. And we managing the resources well, because people got paid, public servants got paid during COVID, which is, again, some countries, half of the public servants had to go home. So we have to say thank you to all who made this possible. Now it's us as scientists, social scientists, to carry it on, to do the work, and do it even if we are not being paid at times to do it, but just do it. And then we know we could solve our problems in the region if we are able to nail it here. Right. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. McNichols, and we want to wish you all the best on your journey and the help that you continue to give us, especially with respect to national security and other areas, and helping us with the social diseases that we have in society. We appreciate your efforts, we appreciate your skills, we appreciate your time, we appreciate your energy. We appreciate everything that you're doing for us. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I
Okay,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.